Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 7th of March 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And what can we say? The weather in Plymouth is really wonderful. Blue sky, but very cold. Reports across the country seem to be the same. London, Brighton. Unfortunately, in the lowlands of Holland, there's a little bit of snow forecast.
Well, it was snowing here this morning.
Well, okay. I missed that bit.
Some of us were up in time to see that.
Okay, thank you for that. So a little bit of snow and cold in Holland. No doubt they'll be skating on the village ponds fairly shortly. And I've been asked to give a special report to the weather in Perth, where apparently it is blue sky and an absolute wonderful day. So there we are. That's what independence can bring you.
So plenty of people will be able to get out and clean.
Yes, cleaning is the hot topic, never mind what you may think. Referendum, trouble in Europe, migrant crisis, war, violence, closure of the NHS. We've got a new campaign which is called Clean for the Queen. And interesting to see the sponsors, because if I'm not wrong, many of these are responsible for producing the very litter we see on the streets in the first place. But it's up to all of us to help clean up for the Queen's birthday. I think this is part of the psyop, Mike, in order to occupy the public so they don't think about the EU referendum too much. But I'm going to thank a lady who pointed this one out to us, because here he is, Plymouth's very own hedgehog champion MP, Oliver Colville, and he's very busy there with his little stick, picking something up. Have you any idea what he could be popping in the sack?
Well, I wasn't sure whether he was popping hedgehogs in there or whether he was popping his financial returns from the last election in there, because of course he
lost a few.
He lost a few, yeah.
He lost a few. Somebody did point out that he almost appears to be in the sack himself, which is not a bad thing. But wouldn't it be a good idea to clean Britain, not of litter, but of paedophiles and criminals in Westminster and the establishment? Well, no, we can't have MPs doing that, of course. While this goes on, this is a letter to Robert Greene, from Cheshire Constabulary, and in the letter they say this, which is very, very significant. It's their code of conduct effectively for rape, sexual abuse crimes, and it says in most cases where the offender is named by the victim, they would be arrested and interviewed in relation to the complaint. And the reason that this is such a significant document is, of course, that Robert Greene and many other people have been trying for years to find out why Grampian Police simply failed to do that very thing around the case of abuse victim Holly Gregg. So Grampian Police failed to interview the people identified, and then, hey presto, there is no crime. So I think we should probably say well done Cheshire for police for at least having the professionalism to respond to that request. Well, while we're busy cleaning the streets, of course, there are one or two slightly concerning things going on. And we've picked up on the activist post here for a report saying that the US has sent an entire carrier group to confront China in the South China Sea. This is in relation to the dispute over these islands and atolls and artificial islands that have been created. But of course, it's being pointed out in this article that China hasn't been stepping outside of her boundaries, doesn't have 700 overseas bases, hasn't been funding international terrorism in the Middle East, and hasn't been attempting to bring down governments in Iraq, Iran, Libya, Afghanistan, and Syria. But not worth talking about, apparently.
It's quite interesting to see the dynamic that's going on within the US Department of Defense and the State Department at the moment, because Ashton Carter, the Defense Secretary, absolutely off his head, trying to start wars absolutely everywhere. John Kerry, I don't know what people think about John Kerry. I know what I think about him. I don't like him very much. But on the other hand, what seems to be happening is that he's going around the world sort of trying to smooth things over after Obama and Carter try to blow things up. So it's pretty disconcerting what might happen when the next regime comes in the United States, because Kerry won't be there.
Indeed, but we don't want to talk about that. We want to be picking up litter, and we want to be desperately concerned about the hedgehog population.
I'm going to start off with this one. This is from Medium, and it's just an opinion piece talking about now I understand how Germany created Hitler. I think this is something that we've all felt on various occasions over the last 10 or 15 years, as we've seen this corporatist agenda being brought in by successive governments and successive politicians. This person focusing on Donald Trump, of course, but I think the comments that are in this could equally apply to Hillary Clinton or to David Cameron, certainly could apply to Tony Blair and many others. So over the years, of course, as we've grown up, Brian, one of the key historical questions that has also always been asked is what kind of people are the Germans that they could have allowed Hitler to happen? And of course, we are watching it happen in front of our eyes. So we get some insight into what happened in Germany in the 1920s and 30s.
I think this is very true, Mike. It certainly opened up my views on the German people and what took place. We remember the comments from the elderly German lady who said, well, the thing is, it came in drip, 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 like an anaesthetic. And that's exactly what we see going on in this country at the moment. The government is dribbling in the policies. The policies create the police state, and it's starting to come in very quickly. The other thing we need, of course, is a propaganda machine. And if you would like to see a demonstration of utter propaganda, go onto YouTube and have a look at this clip where George Galloway is interviewed by a lady called Jo Coburn in the Daily Politics show. Just outrageous that he's been invited on to talk about the reasons why we should come out of the European Union. She's not going to let him speak about that. She is simply going to keep focusing on him personally, to the extent that in a very quiet and measured way, George Galloway says, well, this is just ridiculous. I don't understand why you've bothered to get me on the programme. You just want to give your own opinion. If anybody's not convinced by the outrageous bias and arrogance of the BBC, then do go and have a look at that short clip. It's only 7 minutes, and I think it's the perfect example.
I mean, the fact is, it doesn't really matter what your personal view of George Galloway is. It's really the activities of the BBC that we're talking about here.
Well, that's exactly the point that George Galloway makes. He says, you invited me on this programme to talk about the reasons we need to come out of the European Union. Now I'm here. You don't want to discuss that. You simply want to character assassinate him. I'll just bring in on that slide, if we can, here. Here's the lady. If you go and have a look at her Twitter page, which is always worth doing, you can see her in a video clip crowing that MPs asking questions are costing us a lot of money. This is a woman who works for £3.65 billion worth of BBC that is completely pro the European Union, won't let anybody else speak, swallowing huge amounts of money, covering up the child abuse, and apparently it's the politicians costing us the money. Outrageous.
Right. Well, one of the big topics of 2015 and it continues into this year is devolution, of course. And here we go. This is the Institute of Public Policy Research, and what they're saying is that the new mayor, whenever he or she is elected, must seek a radical transfer of powers from Whitehall, and of course they're using the housing crisis in London to cause this. So. This is the London Housing Commission, and you may ask, what is the London Housing Commission? Well, it's an initiative set up by the Institute of Public Policy Research. This is the UK's leading progressive think tank, according to them. They are an independent registered charity, so they're independent. They're a registered charity, more than 40 staff members. They've got paid interns and visiting fellows, and so it goes on. So they're progressive. Now, what does progressive mean? Well, of course, progressive means it's happening or developing gradually or in stages, according to the dictionary definition. So in other words, what we're looking at here is Gramsci, Alinsky, Fabian gradualism, which progresses the globalist agenda just a little bit at a time. I think that's pretty much what you could say about this. They're also independent. Let's have a look and see what that might mean. And of course, we could always start with where they're funded, because it's always a good place to start. And this little pie chart already sets the alarm bells ringing. So we've got high-value donors. They're a small slice, but trusts and foundations, and of course, who's behind the trusts and foundations? Well, that would be high-value donors. So they're quite a big slice. The British government's a fairly big chunk of it as well. But let's look in a little bit more detail. So here we've got some small donors and the usual suspects in there: Berkeley Group, B Sky B, Institute for Government, and so on. Then we've got some slightly larger donors here. This is up to £15,000. We've got BT Group, we've got BP, we've got a number of others. You can pause this later and read on down through the list. Let's look at the sort of medium-sized donors. We've got City of London, City and Guilds. We've got foundations. We've got Greenpeace in there, Nuffield Trust, and so on. And let's look at the really big donors. And we've got the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, of course. But look who the biggest donor of all is. It is the JP Morgan Chase Foundation. So they claim to be independent, and the question is, independent of what? They're certainly not independent of the global corporatist agenda, because as you have just seen, they are funded by global corporatist institutions, and their largest donation from probably one of the worst global corporatist organizations of them all. But anyway, let's get back to this report. Here it is, Building a New Deal for London. They're saying here, London faces unprecedented challenges in housing its citizens. The London Housing Commission proposes a new deal to secure essential powers and resources for the London Mayor and boroughs, and a programme of immediate actions to start to redress the crisis. So this is classic problem reaction solution at work. The problem was created as a matter of policy, that was the housing crisis. And then, of course, the solution is to devolve powers, remove powers from the British government into the hands of an elected dictatorship, a mayor in London, a feudalist mayor. And if you want to read this document, you can read the details of it. It was, of course, headed up by Lord Kerslake, as he is these days. And he said, while the mayor and the boroughs can do more with the powers that they have now, the only route to solving the housing crisis is to give the capital's leaders more direct responsibility over the key levers.
Right, that wording is absolute common purpose wording, Mike, because we've got the leaders in here. We're not dealing with democracy. This is the appointed leaders, effectively, and the key levers of power is, I'm sure, what that said. So the key leaders. So this is common purpose language, and of course this is the drip, drip, drip of the anaesthetic. So we've got, as David Noakes always said, the EU with the constitution of a dictatorship and the laws of a police state. This is coming in step by step by step. It is so easy to see when you simply take the lift a few stones and have a look at as to what's underneath.
Okay, tonight, this is the wrong date on this, of course. It says Thursday, but it should say Monday, because the last time we did this was a Thursday. But anyway, tonight, Humanity versus Insanity, a follow-up to the last one. So you will be with Ian tonight once again. And following that is Fracking Nightmare, and Ian will be speaking to Alex Gash, who's an owner of a livery yard just adjoining the Horse Hill well site, and she was interviewed on the Politics Show yesterday. So both Crane Report and Fracking Nightmare on tonight, beginning at 7:30. Do join us for that.
Yeah, and we are going to be discussing in as much detail as we can what is actually happening in the country and how serious it is, because it is getting immensely serious now. I think we can see more and more clearly that the EU referendum is a scam, because if there is an outvote, unless the public take a lot more action, the plans are just going to keep going under the surface. So there'll be a veneer, we're out. Meanwhile, the integration will continue unseen. Well, let's jump back to the BBC, and they're on Matters Turkey here. And a big story that the Zaman newspaper has been closed down and actually taken over by the Turkish government because they claimed that it was involved sort of almost with terrorist groups. And what a surprise, now the Turkish government has taken over, it's pushing out the right pro-government material. Well, if we have a look at the report from the BBC, They've got the bit here. Turkey says it's linked into the US-based cleric Gulen. Now, if people are not familiar with that name, they should be, because the Gulen organisation crops up in a lot of places and seems to be instrumental in helping shape policy in countries where you wouldn't expect it to have any influence. But apparently they were aiming to overthrow Erdogan's government, so the paper had to go. Apparently EU leaders are likely to raise the issue of the Zaman newspaper, but the BBC had this to say, that basically the European Union had been particularly weak, BBC's Mark Lowen says. So this is the BBC that won't let George Galloway have free speech over what's happening with the European Union dictatorship. And the European Union is not getting upset when a national newspaper is taken over by a government. Well, of course not. Mr. Lowen, the EU is a dictatorship. I know you can't seem to work that out. Here he is. If you have a look at his Twitter page, there was a report by another gentleman on the Zaman newspaper, a lot of violence by the Turkish government. So they're good at shooting down Russian aircraft, pretty good at violence against their own people. Just the job to come into the European Union, Mike, I would have thought. But the rest of the website has got some very lovely beaches, so I'm not sure what the BBC's correspondent does while he's out there in Turkey, but he doesn't seem to understand he's watching the formation of a dictatorship. Well, meanwhile, we've got this happening on the back of it. So we've got the Mail here reporting that Britain is deploying troops and ships to patrol the sea between Greece and Turkey, the Aegean. And they're going to tackle the migrant crisis, but their main job won't be to stop people entering Europe. So they're going to tackle the crisis, Mike, but they're not going to stop people entering Europe.
So what are they going to do?
It's really not clear. Well, actually it is. We're going to explain what's going on. This is one of the ships they're sending. Well, of course, it's not a warship because we really don't have any. So this is a Royal Fleet Auxiliary, which has a helicopter. And this is what they're doing. They are using the refugee crisis in order to put together the military force of the European superstate. So the movement of these units under EU military control is rapidly building one EU military organisation. And we can follow it through. We just recap. A few days ago, we had General Philip Breedlove saying that the refugee crisis was responsible for everything, the movement of terrorists and criminals. And then, of course, significantly, he said anybody that dares oppose the immigration weakens the continent and could themselves threaten violence. And we said, so basically, if you're UKIP, according to this man, you're a threat not just to UK, you're a threat to the European continent, and you could well be a violent terrorist. Well, the immigration being used to create one EU military. On the 3rd of March, we pointed out this, that we were informed that there was a drive for the EU military to carry out search and rescue missions. We were told the Adriatic, but it's the same agenda. And we'd also pointed out that the main EU control centre was in Northwood, the Maritime Operations Centre just outside London. And we said with great confidence, we are very, very close now to Royal Navy warships flying the EU flag alongside the White Ensign. So if we come back to the article, what we've got here is EU seeks to close the Balkan route at summit. They're closing it, but they're not closing it. Mike, no, because all they're really interested is getting these military operations in place. So what we now know is that actually it's NATO units that are going to be brought into the Aegean. And of course, this is bringing those NATO units under European control. I've used the header here from the Somali operation by the European Union, but I think it says it all, European Union external action. And what we've got is a created migrant crisis so that the EU can take contractual control of NATO. This is forming the EU military structure. And we just remind people that this Somalia one has been going for several years under the basis that Europe is, the EU is there to deliver food aid.
So last week we said exactly this, and you know within a couple of days the headlines are showing it.
Absolutely. But all people have got to do is just look that bit deeper. You create the migrant crisis, you ramp up the wars, you want to break Syria apart, get those people moving, and then once the people are moving in the chaos, you can then put controls on the borders, you can get these European military units moving. Well, I've got to bring this gentleman on screen because I'd missed this when I've been taking a look previously, but the operational commander for this European unit is now a Royal Marine, and he's senior British officer, and what he's actually doing is collaborating with the EU in order to install a unified EU military and command structure deep in the UK. In their own words, he plans and conducts, in this case, the Somali EU operation, in conjunction with the political and military authorities of the European Union. So this Royal Marine is simply working to help create the European superstate. If you'd like to get more information, here's the address for the operation, and of course you can call the media team. Is this treason, Mike, or is that a bit strong?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. It's simply outrageous that, of course, all of this hidden from the public, and we have a senior Royal Marine officer blatantly collaborating in order to help a foreign power slowly take over Britain's armed forces.
And of course, last week when we reported that Cameron was over meeting Hollande, nothing was reported about what he was. It was said in general terms they would be signing defence agreements, but in fact it wasn't defined what those were.
Well, this is true. Well, we got a bit more on that because we'll bring this one up. This was reported a couple of days ago. Of course, Britain is broke at the moment. We don't have any money for roads or trains or the NHS, but we have got enough money to pay half the 1.5 billion that's going to be needed for this super drone deal with the French. But this is the comment that really gives away what was happening. This is from WieldonStrategic.com, and they say this: while British Prime Minister David Cameron and French President François Hollande may have appeared to be bogged down discussing hugely important subjects such as migration and potential impacts of Brexit, the two leaders also confirmed the 2-year feasibility study that had been agreed in 2014 in regard of the future combat air system would now move forward. So we were all told he was over there for very difficult discussions to do with the EU referendum and an exit policy. Of course, that was a complete lie. What he was doing was making sure that we were further locked into an EU military system. And then the other point brought out in this article is this: in separate moves agreed by French and British defence ministers, it was agreed that an officer swap with the French army would mean that a senior French officer is set to be given the position of deputy commander of the 1st United Kingdom Division, and there's going to be a British Army guy going the French direction. All of this might done without the slightest discussion in Parliament, and we've got the joke of an EU referendum. We've got the dictatorship being built by the day.
If it wasn't anything but a fraud, they would have to stop this further integration until they had the result of the referendum in their hands.
They don't need the result of the referendum, because if the referendum is come out, unless the correct actions are taken, they're going to carry on building the European Union superstate. So, are we in a dictatorship at the moment? I think so. We're not far from it.
Well, François Hollande may not have any worries about doing dirty deals with David Cameron. He at least marginally public about this, but they were not so keen about making it public that they'd done a dirty deal with the Saudi Crown Prince. They gave him the Legion of Honor.
As you would. What for, Mike? funding terrorism or...
I think probably Yemen may be part of it. Who knows? But they say that any foreign dignitary coming along gets one of these. They're giving out like sweeties or something to foreign dignitaries. Is really the excuse they're making. But the point was they basically didn't want to tell anybody. So they eventually, it happened. The visit and the presentation of this happened on the 4th of March, and they only admitted to it on finally yesterday, I think.
There's almost a look of love in that man's eyes as he's looking into the face. Do you think there's more to this than meets the eye?
The word they used was discretion, so who knows? He could be right.
Well, perhaps there's something wrong with all of us. And we warned a couple of days ago that the British government is unleashing a phenomenal policy, and that is to get the dementia statistics to 2 million people by 2050. And we do mean that the government is saying that they want 2 million people to be diagnosed as dementia sufferers by 2050. And how do we know that that is the agenda? Because they say simply they want GPs to increase the dementia diagnoses. So we're going to make it easier and more profitable for GPs to diagnose people as having dementia. And of course, once they're diagnosed with dementia, their property can be taken from them or literally stolen in some cases. So clearly, it's as though the whole nation is being attacked, Mike, and we are going to be branded mentally ill. We're going to be caused to become mentally ill.
Indeed, and the initial part of this is the Prime Minister's Challenge on Dementia 2020. This is the implementation plan. I do suggest people get a hold of this and read through it. And this is the main report, which goes with that implementation plan. And what they're saying here is the Prime Minister's Challenge on Dementia 2020 is setting out 50 specific commitments that aim to make England the world leader in dementia care research and awareness, is what is being reported in the mainstream press. Here's a bit from the executive summary. Today we are making measurable, tangible progress in our vital work to make England the best place in the world to live with dementia. So they don't talk about curing dementia, they don't talk about research into dementia, we're talking about living with dementia. So this fits in with what you've just said. What we're doing here is creating a revenue stream for private corporations that work in the pharmaceutical industry and in healthcare and so on. Because what we're going to have is people that are living on a long-term basis with dementia. And so they're going to need to be cared for. So we don't want them cured, we want them cared for. And ultimately, of course, they will be cared for in a sort of fatal way, no doubt. But anyway, they go on to say, we're building a society that is more equipped to support those with dementia through transforming health and social care, training thousands of staff, and through community programs like Dementia Friends, a success of which we can all be proud. And they say between 2012 and 2015, government funding for dementia research has doubled to over £60 million a year. So let's just think about that, £60 million a year. This is something they're saying we're going to have 2 million sufferers of this diagnosed by 2050. That's clearly a national emergency, is it not?
Should be.
And they're putting £60 million into research. So here's a suggestion. If dementia is such a national emergency, why not swap the dementia research and BBC budgets? How about putting £3 billion into dementia research and £60 million into the BBC? That would seem like a much better deal to me, Brian.
Seem a reasonable deal. I thought the BBC could produce its present output on 60 million without any trouble at all. Well, a few people are sort of asking, where does this lead to? Well, it's very easy. Let's have a look at this one. This is where it stems from, Global Action Against Dementia. And let's read what this organisation has to say. The creation of a World Dementia Council was one of the main commitments made at the G8 Dementia Summit in December 2013. The Council aims to stimulate innovation, development and commercialisation of life-enhancing drugs. Sounds good, Mike, doesn't it? Life-enhancing drugs, treatments and care for people with dementia or at risk of dementia within a generation. It will do this by providing independent, non-governmental advocacy and, here's the words, global leadership. This is a genocide program, Mike. I'm not embarrassed to say this live. If you analyse what's going on here, this is to strip people of their property, to suck them dry of money. When they run out of money, what comes next? Liverpool Care Pathway.
And in the meantime, it provides a massive revenue stream for companies that are getting into this new market. And that's what it is. So we are being farmed, and at some point we'll be culled.
And of course,
is that too extreme?
No, I think it's absolutely spot on. The World Dementia Council is boasting there. Shall I just read that again? It says that the council aims to stimulate innovation, development, and commercialisation. So they're clearly interested in firms making more profit out of the millions of people who are going to suffer from dementia. But not one word about what are the causes of the dementia. We don't want to talk about that. We just want to get into how we're going to make more profit out of the people.
Creating a new market.
We said a dictatorship was coming. These are the signs of Nazi Germany at its worst.
Yeah.
Genocide.
Yes. Okay. In the meantime, of course, financial system continues to collapse. And this is the March 2016 Bank for International Settlements quarterly review. The Bank for International Settlements, to remind everybody, is the central banker's central bank. Lots of policy set here, and of course all the major central bankers get together for their confabs there in Geneva. So they are saying that a fragile calm in global financial markets has given way to all-out turbulence. They're saying in the previous quarterly report they were describing it as an uneasy calm. Claudio Borio, who's the chief of the Bank for International Settlements, said the tension between the market's tranquility and the underlying economic vulnerabilities had to be resolved at some point. In the recent quarter, we may have been witnessing the beginning of this new resolution. We may not be seeing isolated bolts from the blue, but the signs of a gathering storm which has been building for a long time. Now, I don't believe in coincidence. Brian, do you believe in coincidence?
Not in a political sense, Mike, no.
No, nor in a financial sense either. So it didn't really come as much a surprise that pretty much at exactly the same time, Rothschild is saying exactly the same thing. So this is a letter that he wrote to his investors at the Rothschild Investment Trust, which is, of course, a large investment trust dedicated, according to its Wikipedia page, to investments in quoted securities and quoted special situations. So there you go. Chairman Lord Rothschild, he sent everybody a letter warning that the QE tap is on course to being turned off. He's saying there's a slowing down to an unknown extent in China. He's saying the situation in the Middle East is likely to be unresolvable. What we're actually saying is policy statements here. He's saying progress of the US and European economies is disappointing. He's talking about the Greek situation. He's talking about witnessing an explosion in debt. And he's saying that in the UK, there is an unsettled political situation with the European EU referendum PSYOP. And he's saying, not surprisingly, market conditions have deteriorated further, so much so that the wind is certainly not behind us. Indeed, we may be in the eye of the storm. So everybody talking about storms, but it's all okay, don't worry, because George Osborne is riding to the rescue. Here he is. The government has learnt the lessons of the past, he says. And so today, apparently, he has put in legislation which becomes active today, which means that senior managers of UK banks could face 7 years in prison or an unlimited fine if their actions lead to the failure of a bank.
Okay.
There you go.
So how does this move us forward? Are we going to investigate the crimes we already know about?
No, it doesn't move us forward in any way, shape or form. And they're also saying that basically under this new system, that banks will have to get, whenever they put someone in a senior position, that's regulated by the Prudential Regulatory Authority, for example, that those people will have to be pre-vetted by the regulators, and they're implying that this is something new. In fact, this is something that's been the case for quite some time. But nonetheless, we don't need to worry because Georgie boy is on the case, and lessons have been learned.
Every picture of that man, he's got that slightly vacant, puzzled look on his face. It's almost in his eyes, as he doesn't know why he's really there or what he's really doing or what's. Could we just pop him back up? Because I'm sure this is not my imagination. He's always looks as though he isn't actually at home, whether he's sat on the benches in Westminster or he's talking to the press.
Well, there are a lot of rumours about why that might be.
Right.
Apparently it snows quite a lot.
In Westminster.
Yes.
Well, we've heard that before. Well, that brings us to the end of today's news. We've got to say that events are unfolding in Britain in 2016 very, very quickly indeed. Our government is lying to us. There is a dictatorship coming into being. That is very clear. And of course, the main reason for this is the amount of propaganda that's being spewed out, mainly by the BBC, but of course other mainstream organisations, means people are simply not aware of the detail that they need to be aware of. So don't believe what we have told you today. Do your own research, have a look into all of the issues, including the migrants, the build-up of the EU army, and probably the last one in particular, penultimate one, was it, the dementia, because it seems to us that there is a clear government agenda to simply remove the problem, us, from the playing field. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.